Hi guys. Tonight we drift back hundreds of years into a time when the cold was not a season, but a force that ruled life itself. Imagine stepping outside your timber cottage and feeling the air so sharp it makes your breath sting. The sky is a deep blue-black, powdered with stars that seem frozen mid-twinkle. Smoke curls upward from a few stubborn hearths, and snow creaks underfoot like breaking glass. Inside, the fire barely holds its ground against the chill pressing through the walls. You probably would not survive this night without a roaring fire, a thick wool cloak, and a fair bit of luck. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where in the world you are and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights, and let's slip quietly into the story. You open your eyes in a medieval winter, sometime around the year 1350. There is no hum of electricity, no engine in the distance. The silence of snow wraps around everything, broken only by the crackle of a fire or the bark of a dog. The smell of wood smoke clings to your cloak, and your breath ghosts before you in the cold air. The village sleeps early in winter. Candles and torches are too precious to waste. This is a world where warmth is work. Every ember in the hearth has been earned through chopping, hauling, and pleading with damp logs to catch fire. You move closer to the flames, feeling the rough stones at your feet, hearing them pop from the heat. A woman nearby stirs a pot of thin broth made from barley and leeks. The scent is earthy, simple, and almost painfully comforting. Outside, the wind sighs against the shutters, carrying a dry hiss of snow. Historians agree that winters in the Middle Ages were generally harsher than those of modern Europe, especially during the early part of the Little Ice Age. Some chronicles describe rivers like the Thames freezing solid enough for oxen to cross. In such times, the cold was not only a discomfort, it was a test of endurance. Yet there were always the resilient few who saw the frost as cleansing, a pause in the rhythm of work, even a sacred stillness. You glance at the firelight playing along the beams above. Everything smells faintly of soot and iron. The family huddled near you talks softly, almost reverently, about the spirits that wander in the long dark months. Children believe the wind carries voices of those lost in past winters. You might almost believe it too. The air has a certain weight to it, like breath held too long. One fact about this time stands out. People rarely bathed in winter. Water froze in buckets, wells were rimed with ice, and warming enough water for washing meant wasting precious firewood. Instead, people rubbed themselves with rough cloths, wore layers of linen, and hoped for spring. A quirky belief persisted that bathing could make the body more vulnerable to cold air. So, in some regions, the cleaner you were, the sicker you might become. Still, even amid the hardship, the sight of firelight against frost was beautiful. The windows, covered in animal hide or oiled parchment, glowed softly like captured sunrise. You notice how everything flickers. The walls, the faces, the very air. The rhythm of life itself seems slower, thicker. There is no rushing through winter. You step outside for a moment, crunching across the yard toward the barn. The cold bites instantly through wool and leather. Your breath fogs and drifts upward like incense. In the distance, a dog howls once, then quiets. Somewhere under the snow, seeds from last summer wait in silence. You think of how time itself feels heavier here. Winter is not a pause between seasons but a separate world. Historians still argue whether people in the Middle Ages feared winter as punishment from God, or revered it as a necessary purification of the earth. In truth, it was probably both. Priests warned that the long nights were a time when devils prowled, yet they also preached that frost kept the world honest, killing disease and corruption. People listened to both sermons, nodding, and then trudged home to their fires, where they tried to survive the next cold dawn. You return to the cottage. The door groans on its hinges. The smell of smoke and soup enfolds you again. A child curls near the hearth, clutching a wooden toy horse. Someone hums a half-forgotten carol about saints and snow. You sit by the fire, warming your hands, and let the sound of the crackling logs fill the quiet. It is hypnotic, almost sacred. You imagine that every spark is a story, every wisp of smoke a prayer for spring. Outside, the frost thickens. It coats rooftops, locks doors, and creeps across the land until everything glitters under the moonlight. In the distance, you can see the faint shape of a castle tower rising above the white fields, its banners stiff with ice. You know there are fires burning there too, and people wrapped in cloaks just as you are, whispering the same wish, that dawn will come soon, and that it will bring warmth. But for now, you stay still, wrapped in this moment. The fire pops again, and the embers glow like small suns. You feel the ancient rhythm of the season, a quiet agreement between people and the cold. Endure, wait, and hope. You lean back, eyes heavy, and listen to the sighing wind. Somewhere beyond these walls, the medieval world sleeps, dreaming in frost and firelight. You wake to the sound of silence so complete that it hums in your ears. The world outside has vanished under a white sheet of snow. When you push open the wooden door, the hinges cry out like a tired bird, and the cold surges in as if it has been waiting all night. The fields stretch out before you, smooth and untouched. The stubble of last year's harvest lies hidden under a perfect crust of frost. You pull your cloak tighter and step out, the snow creaking under your boots with a slow, satisfying crunch. It is here, in these frozen fields, that you begin to understand what survival really meant during a medieval winter. There is no storehouse of abundance waiting somewhere. There are no supermarkets glowing with bright lights. What you have is what you managed to preserve before the frost arrived. Salted meat, dried beans, rye bread hard as stone. A good harvest means comfort, but a poor one means hunger that gnaws through the long months. You pass a small granary, its walls patched with mud and straw. Inside, the smell is musty, earthy, alive with the faint whisper of grain dust. Every handful of barley is precious. You can almost see the invisible calculations in the minds of the villagers: how much to eat now, how much to save for later, and how much might simply rot if the cold becomes too deep. People who lived through these winters became mathematicians of hunger. They knew exactly how long a loaf could last, how to stretch a pot of stew into another meal. The peasant's calendar was carved by hardship. From the first frost until the thaw, every day was a small gamble with nature. A mainstream fact about medieval life: many villages held communal granaries and ovens, owned by the lord or the monastery. You paid to use them, often in grain or labor, and those payments kept the hierarchy alive even in the dead of winter. The local lord might feast while the villagers tightened their belts, yet even he relied on their work to fill his storerooms. The balance was fragile, as if the cold itself were part of the social order. A quirky tidbit drifts through your thoughts. In some places, people believed that if you whistled while baking bread in winter, you would summon the frost demons who would steal the yeast's warmth. So they worked in silence, kneading heavy dough in dim kitchens, the only sound the steady thump of fists against the table. Superstition was a kind of insurance policy. When the world froze, faith and folklore became as vital as food. You look toward the horizon where the fields end in a dark line of trees. That forest was both friend and enemy. Its wood kept fires alive, but wolves roamed its depths, driven closer to villages by hunger. The night before, you heard someone swear they saw yellow eyes at the edge of the tree line. People nailed sprigs of holly above doors, not for beauty but for protection. The scent of pine mixed with smoke, marking the borders between the human world and the wild. Historians still debate whether the average medieval winter was truly harsher than the records suggest, or if chroniclers exaggerated to frame hardship as divine punishment. What is certain is that these winters shaped everything from architecture to prayer. Thick stone walls held the cold as much as they kept it out. Churches rose like frozen fortresses against the sky, their bells muffled by snow. The rhythm of daily life slowed, but it never stopped. By midday, the light shifts. The sun glints weakly on the frozen fields, and the air smells faintly metallic, like ice and old iron. You see figures bent under bundles of firewood, trudging home along paths carved by countless feet. A farmer stops to break the crust of snow over his well, hacking at it with a spade. The sound echoes across the valley like a drum. The animals share in the struggle. Sheep huddle close, their wool matted with frost. Chickens roost in the hayloft, their breath steaming faintly in the gloom. Even the village dogs seem slower, padding warily through the snow. It is a kind of truce between all creatures. Everyone moves less, eats less, speaks less. The silence of winter demands respect. As the day fades, the temperature plunges again. The sky turns lavender, and the fields glow in a ghostly blue light. Smoke begins to rise from chimneys, each column twisting and fading into the still air. You walk back toward the cottages, feeling the sting of the cold on your cheeks. The horizon seems to blur as snow begins to fall again, thin and patient. Inside one house, you glimpse a mother ladling thin gruel into bowls. Children crowd near the fire, cupping their hands around the steam. She looks tired, her eyes hollow yet calm. Survival is not heroic here. It is ordinary, repeated endlessly one day after another. And still they find small joys, the warmth of shared breath, the sweetness of honey saved from summer, the flicker of candlelight across worn wooden beams. You sit on a log and look out at the frozen fields one last time. Somewhere under that blanket of snow lie the seeds of another season. Life is hidden, not gone. The world seems asleep, but it is dreaming of green things, of rain, of warmth. You can almost hear the slow heartbeat of the earth under the frost. In this stillness, you understand something the people of that age knew well. Winter is not merely a pause, it is a teacher. It asks what you truly need, what you can endure, what you will cherish when the thaw returns. You feel it in your bones, in your breath, in the endless white stretching before you. The last light fades, and the first stars pierce the sky again. The fields vanish into shadow, silent and waiting. You wake to a pale morning light that filters through the cracks in the shutters. The air inside your cottage hangs heavy and still. Frost feathers crawl across the window frame, delicate as lace. You reach for your cloak before daring to move. The fire burned out hours ago, leaving only a faint glow under the ashes. Your breath forms little clouds that drift and vanish before your eyes. Today, your task is simple in theory and cruel in practice. Stay warm. In the Middle Ages, winter clothing was a matter of survival, not style. You layer linen over wool, wool over more wool, each piece hand-stitched, coarse, and slightly damp. The air smells of lanolin and smoke. The fabric scratches at your neck, but the warmth it traps feels like mercy. According to preserved inventories from manor houses and monasteries, a well-prepared person might own a heavy cloak lined with fur, a long tunic, thick hose, and boots stuffed with straw. Ordinary villagers, however, often made do with patched garments handed down for years. The wealthier could afford pelts of fox, marten, or even imported sable, while the poor wrapped themselves in whatever scraps of hide or rough cloth they could find. It was less about comfort and more about enduring one more day without freezing. You tie a strip of cloth around your hands, makeshift mittens that will stiffen once wet. Outside, the wind scours the fields and whistles through gaps in the walls. You can almost feel it probing for weakness, sneaking under door frames, through cracks in the roof. There is no insulation, no glass, no barrier but effort and hope. One peculiar custom from the period was the practice of sleeping fully dressed, often with hats and gloves. In many homes, families shared beds, layering bodies like blankets. The warmth of others became the most dependable heating system. Children, parents, and even guests might sleep side by side under heavy woolen covers. It was practical, but it also created a strange intimacy, one born not of affection, but necessity. Some researchers remain uncertain about how widely fur was used among commoners. While paintings often show peasants in simple cloth, written accounts mention trade in rabbit skins and squirrel pelts, especially in northern regions. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between the images and the words. People wore whatever they could, scavenge, mend, or barter. The boundary between peasant and noble warmth was thinner than it looked. You step outside into the biting cold. The snow has hardened overnight, shining like glass under the weak sun. Your boots crunch as you walk toward the animal shed. The door groans, and a wave of breath from the cows steams out, warm and sour. Inside, it feels almost tropical compared to the open air. The animals shift and snort, their bodies radiating heat that fogs the small space. Many families kept their livestock close to the house for this reason alone. The beast's warmth seeped through the walls, a living insulation. You run a hand along the rough flank of a cow, feeling the coarse hair beneath your palm. Its hide trembles, and you sense a bond older than language. Humans and animals survive winter together, each depending on the other's breath to keep death at bay. The smell of hay, dung, and earth fills your lungs, strangely grounding. A curious superstition lingers in your mind. In parts of medieval Europe, people believed that if you wore the fur of a bear, you would inherit its strength and resistance to cold. Hunters told stories of men who slept inside fresh hides to absorb the creature's power. The idea seems grotesque now, but back then, anything that promised survival was worth believing. Back in the cottage, you see women spinning wool, fingers reddened by the chill. The wheel turns slowly, rhythmically, and the fibers twist into thread that will later become another layer against the wind. The work never ends, but the motion itself seems to warm them. They hum softly as they spin, the sound mingling with the faint crackle of rekindled fire. Experts still puzzle over the origins of certain winter garments. The hooded cloak, for example, appears in records across Europe but takes on different names and shapes depending on the region. In England it was the liripipe, in France the chaperon, in Italy the cappuccio. Was it simply fashion, or did its long tail serve to wrap around the neck for extra warmth? No one can say with certainty, but every version speaks of a shared struggle against the same relentless cold. By evening, your clothes feel heavier, the layers trapping not just heat but the day's fatigue. The fire flickers again, casting long shadows over the room. The smell of damp wool mingles with that of smoke and broth. Someone near you repairs a cloak by lamplight, threading bone needles with shaking hands. The small act feels heroic in its simplicity. Every stitch is an act of defiance against the season. Outside, snow begins to fall once more, slow and soundless. You can see it through the thin parchment window, flakes drifting like ash from the sky. You pull your cloak tighter, settling near the fire. The warmth feels earned, fragile, and fleeting. The world beyond may be frozen, but inside, wrapped in layers of wool and willpower, you can almost believe that spring will come again. The next morning, the wind howls across the valley like a beast searching for a door to break. You wake in a room that smells of smoke, damp straw, and the faint metallic scent of frost creeping through stone. Your breath plumes in the air. Somewhere above, the roof beams groan under the weight of snow. You are in a castle this time, a place that should feel secure, yet the cold here feels different. It is vast, echoing, and ancient, as though the stones themselves exhale winter. You walk through the great hall, boots thudding on flagstones slick with melted frost. The fire in the enormous hearth burns day and night, devouring entire logs in a few hours, yet still fails to chase the chill from the corners. Tapestries hang from the walls, colourful but useless against the draught that snakes in through every crack. The flames dance in the carved eyes of the gargoyles above the hearth. making them seem alive. Documents from the period reveal that castles were not built for comfort, but for defense. Thick stone walls held in cold as much as they kept enemies out. The lords who lived here owned dozens of servants whose main duty during winter was to keep fires burning, water unfrozen, and food warm enough to eat before it turned hard again. The warmth of a single chamber might cost a small forest in firewood by the end of the season. You pass by the servants carrying bundles of logs, their faces ruddy from the cold. They move quickly, eyes lowered, their hands chapped and raw. The castle is both fortress and prison during these months. The smell of smoke clings to every curtain, every cloak, every breath. Even noblemen wake with frost on their beards. Among the odd habits of castle life was the practice of spreading straw across the floors, sometimes mixed with herbs like lavender or mint. It softened the step and masked the odors of damp and sweat. Yet as the days passed, it gathered crumbs, spilled ale, and ash until the floor became a compost heap of warmth and filth. It was not replaced often, for that meant carrying out frozen bundles through icy courtyards. A strange comfort, but comfort nonetheless. Experts who study medieval architecture often disagree on how warm these castles could truly become. Some believe that thick draperies and enclosed hearths helped trap heat effectively, while others argue that the sheer size of the rooms made true warmth impossible. You imagine the truth lies in between. Close to the fire, cheeks glow red and fingers thaw. Step a few feet away, and your breath clouds again. The castle is a study in contrasts, luxury and discomfort stitched together by survival. In a corner of the hall, a minstrel tunes his lute, his fingers clumsy in the cold. The melody that follows is soft, drifting like snowflakes across the room. A group of nobles listens, wrapped in fur-trimmed cloaks, sipping warm, spiced wine from pewter cups. The smell of cloves and smoke mingles in the air. Someone laughs, the sound ringing sharp against the stone. Yet even here, surrounded by music and light, you can see the faint tremor in their hands, the way they edge closer to the flames. A peculiar belief among the aristocracy held that keeping the fire too large at night might anger spirits who roamed in the smoke. Servants were instructed to bank the embers carefully, not to extinguish them, but to let them glow faintly until dawn. Too much light was said to attract misfortune, so the hall slept in a kind of uneasy twilight, shadows breathing across the floor. Later, you wander through the corridors, where frost grows on the walls like lichen. You run your fingers across it, and they come away wet. The torches flicker weakly, their smoke trailing upward to vanish into dark ceilings. You hear your footsteps echoing off the stone, each one a hollow reminder of how immense and empty these halls can be in winter. In the Lord's private chamber, the bed is surrounded by heavy curtains. Inside, it feels almost warm. Furs from distant lands cover the mattress. The smell of animal fat from burning lamps is thick and acrid. On the table beside the bed lies a goblet half frozen with wine. You touch it and feel the cold bite your skin. Even privilege cannot buy warmth from the season. Outside the window, you glimpse the courtyard below. The well is crusted with ice, and a servant struggles to draw water, her breath rising like mist. Beyond the walls, the landscape lies silent, carved in white and silver. The only movement is the faint smoke curling from the village below, where peasants huddle around their smaller fires. The castle, for all its grandeur, is only a bigger version of their struggle. Researchers have noted that medieval people had a complex relationship with the cold. It was feared, respected, and occasionally admired. Chroniclers describe frost as both an enemy and a purifier, the breath of God sweeping across the land. Inside the castle, as outside, life moved to the rhythm of the flames. You return to the great hall. The fire has burned low again, and servants hurry to feed it. Sparks leap upward, glowing briefly before vanishing into the rafters. The music has stopped, the laughter has faded, and the silence of winter has returned, patient and vast. You sit near the hearth, watching the logs crumble to ash, and you feel it again, that quiet understanding that warmth, like life itself, is temporary, fragile, and endlessly fought for. The night deepens, and you find yourself leaving the castle behind, following the narrow path that winds down to the village. The air smells faintly of pine and smoke. Snow crunches beneath your boots. Every exhale turns to mist. In the distance, the glow of cottage fires dots the darkness like small, stubborn stars. When you reach the edge of the village, you hear the low murmur of voices and the occasional bark of a dog. The cottages sit huddled together, their thatched roofs weighed down with snow, their doors barred against the wind. Inside one, a faint orange light flickers through the cracks in the shutters. You push open the door and step into warmth that feels almost human in its welcome. The cottage is one large room, low-ceilinged, walls blackened by years of smoke. The hearth dominates everything. It is not merely a source of heat, but the center of life itself. Around it, a family gathers, faces lit gold and red. You hear laughter, see hands stirring a pot, the sound of a spoon scraping against a wooden bowl. The smell of onions, herbs, and ash fills the air, comforting and raw. According to village records that survive from the 13th century, nearly every home had a single open hearth. Chimneys were rare luxuries, and smoke curled freely through the room before escaping through holes in the roof. The air inside was thick and grey, yet that smoke helped cure the timber, preserved meat, and, oddly enough, kept insects away. The line between discomfort and survival was always thin. A curious practice at the time was the use of shared fires. In smaller hamlets, neighbours might visit each other's cottages not for conversation, but simply to warm their bones. It was an unspoken exchange of heat. A dying fire in one home could mean death by morning, so the warmth of others became a kind of shared currency. No one owned the flame alone. Experts who study rural life suggest that the hearth was also a sacred boundary. Families offered bits of food or drops of ale to the fire, believing that a household spirit lived within it. The flickering light was thought to watch over the home, protecting it from illness and misfortune. If the fire went out unexpectedly, people whispered that the spirit had left in anger. To reignite it was to ask forgiveness. You sit beside the fire and watch the flames twist. The children play near the warmth, tracing patterns in the soot on the floor. Their laughter mingles with the crackle of the burning logs. The mother hums a song that sounds older than memory, her voice low and steady. It speaks of spring, of green fields, of patience. The rhythm of it seems to weave the whole room together. In one corner, a man repairs a wooden yoke by candlelight. His hands are cracked, the nails black with dirt. The candle sputters and gutters, threatening to die, but he shields it with his palm and murmurs something under his breath. A prayer, perhaps, or a simple plea to keep the light alive a little longer. Historians remain uncertain about how much social life revolved around the hearth, yet many accounts suggest it was everything. People cooked, worked, mended, told stories, even slept beside it. The warmth drew them together, erasing distinctions between age and rank for a few hours each night. The poorest and the wealthiest alike sat before their fires and watched the same dance of light and shadow. There is a faint superstition that if you stare too long into the flames, you will glimpse faces of the dead. Some say they are ancestors watching, others that they are spirits of those who froze beyond the village. The family here does not seem afraid of that idea. They gaze into the fire as if it speaks to them, whispering of endurance, of memory, of the quiet rhythm of survival. Outside, the wind presses against the walls like a restless creature. Snowflakes slip in through cracks, melting instantly on the warm air. You can hear the low moan of the wind mingling with the soft breathing of those gathered around you. The fire pops and flares, sending sparks up the chimney hole like shooting stars. According to old church writings, sin and warmth were uneasy companions. Too much comfort was thought to weaken the spirit. Yet even the priests who preached this truth were known to linger close to their own hearths when the nights grew long. Perhaps warmth, like faith, was something people chased in the dark without fully understanding. A sudden gust rattles the roof, scattering a few flakes of snow down the chimney. The youngest child squeals, then laughs as her mother brushes the flakes from her hair. For a moment, everything is pure, simple joy. The father smiles, the firelight flickers, and the cottage feels like the center of the world. You close your eyes and listen. The steady rhythm of breathing, the hiss of sap in the burning logs, the heartbeat of life in winter. This is not luxury, but it is peace. The hearth hums softly, a reminder that warmth, once shared, multiplies. Outside, the night deepens again, but inside, the world glows fragile, smoky, and alive. Morning comes slowly, a dull grey light seeping through the clouds. The air carries the heavy scent of snow and smoke, and the village stirs to life with soft sounds. A rooster calling, boots crunching outside, a door creaking open. Today feels different. There is excitement beneath the cold. The Yule feast is coming, and even the poorest cottages hum with preparation. You follow the path toward the manor hall, where the largest fire you have ever seen blazes in a wide stone hearth. The warmth rolls outward in waves, and you can smell roasting meat, spiced wine, and fresh bread. The villagers arrive in small groups, faces red from the wind, carrying baskets wrapped in cloth. The mood is bright despite the chill, as if everyone has agreed to forget the cold for one day. According to surviving festival accounts, the Yule feast was a highlight of winter across Europe. It marked the turning of the year, a pause between the darkness behind and the light ahead. Even in times of hunger, people saved their best for this day. The lord of the manor opened his stores, offering ale and food to his tenants, both to show generosity and to secure loyalty. It was charity and politics wrapped in one. One unusual custom of the time involved the Yule log, a massive piece of oak chosen for its size and endurance. It was dragged inside, often by oxen, and set alight on Christmas Eve. The log was meant to burn slowly, smouldering through all 12 nights of the celebration. Families kept a fragment of it to protect their homes through the coming year. If it failed to stay alight, people whispered that misfortune would follow. You can feel the energy of the crowd around the fire. Children press close, wide-eyed as sparks leap into the rafters. The smell of pine resin fills the hall, mingling with the sweetness of honeyed cakes. Someone begins to sing, the melody winding upward like smoke. The song speaks of endurance, of light returning after the long dark. It is not polished or practiced, but it carries a kind of raw beauty that makes your chest ache. Chroniclers of the age often described these feasts as both sacred and chaotic. Ale flowed freely, laughter grew loud, and for a short time, the rigid lines of rank softened. A serf could joke with his lord, a maid could dance with a knight. The cold outside ceased to exist. For a few hours, warmth belonged to everyone. In a corner, an old woman tells stories to the children. Her voice is cracked and steady, and the firelight dances across her face as she speaks of saints, miracles, and ghosts that walk during the 12 nights of Yule. The children shiver and grin, torn between fear and fascination. According to oral traditions preserved in various regions, people believed that these long nights were a bridge between worlds, when the dead could visit the living. It was not always a fearful thought. Some placed food outside for wandering souls, small tokens of remembrance. Experts on medieval festivals still debate whether these celebrations were more pagan or Christian in nature. Evidence suggests that the Church absorbed older rituals of the winter solstice, reshaping them into holy days. The burning of the Yule log, the feasting, the evergreen decorations, all of it may have roots in far older traditions, long before Christendom took hold. The truth, as always, lies tangled between faith and fire. As the feast continues, the sound of laughter fills the air. People toast to health, to spring, to each other. The fire roars so loudly it drowns the wind outside. The musicians play fiddles and drums, and couples spin across the straw-covered floor. The flickering light turns their faces gold, and for a moment you forget that this is a world of hunger and hardship. For tonight, the medieval winter glows. A curious sight catches your eye near the back of the hall. A servant quietly fills a cup and slips out into the snow. You follow him to the edge of the courtyard, where he kneels and pours the wine onto the ground. He whispers a few words, barely audible, something about ancestors and gratitude. When he stands again, he looks lighter, almost at peace. You realize that this private ritual, this quiet moment in the cold, holds as much weight as all the roaring fires inside. As midnight approaches, the revelry softens. The log still burns, steady and proud. People drift toward home, their faces glowing from heat and happiness. The snow has stopped falling, and the stars seem sharper now, cutting through the black sky. You walk back to your cottage, the echoes of laughter fading behind you. Inside, the small fire still glows, and you stretch your hands toward it. The scent of roasted meat lingers in your clothes, mingled with smoke and the sweetness of ale. You feel full in a way that is not just physical. The feast has reminded everyone that warmth is meant to be shared, that even in the harshest season, joy can be made. You sit by the hearth and let your thoughts drift. The sound of distant singing drifts through the cold air, faint but steady. The embers pulse softly, as if breathing. Winter has not loosened its grip yet, but tonight you feel something stronger than frost. The sun barely rises the next day, a pale disk smothered by grey clouds. You hear the faint jingle of harnesses before you see the first wagon roll into the village square. Despite the cold, a market has come to life. The air smells of wet wool, hay, and steaming broth from a distant pot. You draw your cloak tighter, joining the crowd gathering around makeshift stalls. It is a winter fair, the kind that breaks the monotony of dark months and brings a flicker of colour to frozen days. Old accounts from civic ledgers and monastery records tell us that winter markets were essential gatherings. When travel slowed and roads froze, trade had to adapt. Merchants moved along river routes and frozen paths, their carts creaking with goods. Here, in the square, you see what that means. Baskets of onions, spools of yarn, salted fish, candles, and the deep red of cured meat hanging from wooden beams. The smell of tallow and smoke mixes with laughter. A curious tradition from such fairs was the selling of snow charms. Small carvings made of bone or wax were said to protect travelers from blizzards. They dangled from belts or were tucked into pockets, little tokens against bad fortune. Children begged for them, not just for luck, but because they shone in the weak winter light like treasure. Some merchants whispered that their ancestors had used them long before the church blessed their trade. You pass a table where a woman sells wool mittens in every colour you can imagine. Her fingers are red from the cold, but her eyes are bright. She tells you that each pattern comes from a different village, each stitch carrying its own meaning. To wear another village's design, she says, is to carry their blessing. Her words linger in your mind. Even in frost, people find ways to weave connection. Experts on medieval trade note that fairs like these were more than marketplaces. They were news centres, matchmaking hubs, and sometimes scenes of secret negotiations. Farmers discussed the price of grain while monks bargained for parchment. Travellers shared tales of distant towns, of frozen rivers and safe routes through the forest. Knowledge, like heat, was passed from person to person, word to word. The sound of hooves draws your attention. A man arrives leading a horse draped in bells. He offers rides around the square for a small coin. Children squeal with delight as they climb up, clutching the horse's mane while their parents laugh. The bells jingle through the air, a melody that cuts through the cold. You can almost feel a smile spreading through the crowd, brief but genuine. Another odd practice catches your eye. A baker sells loaves stamped with tiny symbols, stars, animals, even crude faces. Each mark carries a wish. Break the bread before eating, and the symbol's promise might come true. One loaf bears a small sun etched in the crust. You buy it and tuck it under your arm, the warmth seeping through the cloth. It feels like holding hope itself. Researchers who study medieval fairs sometimes question how much money actually changed hands. Many trades were barter, not coin. A length of linen for a jug of ale, a pot of honey for a pair of boots. Currency mattered less than trust. To cheat in winter was to risk being cast out of future trades. Honesty, even if born of fear, was a kind of glue that held communities together. The market continues into the afternoon. Smoke thickens in the air as vendors light torches. A juggler performs in the center of the square, colored scarves flashing through the twilight. People clap, their mittens muffling the sound. A fiddler joins in, playing a tune that loops endlessly, hypnotic and sweet. For a moment, the village feels alive again, defying the stillness of the season. As the light fades, the merchants begin to pack up. You watch them wrap their goods, tie bundles, and load wagons. The sound of ropes tightening, wheels creaking, and soft voices fills the air. The fair dissolves slowly, like mist fading from a river. Soon only footprints remain, pressed into the snow like temporary memories. According to local folklore preserved in a few northern chronicles, travelers who left these winter fairs after dark carried lanterns shaped like stars. They were said to guide lost souls back to warmth. Perhaps it was just a story, or perhaps people needed to believe that even those who vanished in the snow could find their way home. You take one last look at the empty square. The snow has begun to fall again, thick and slow. The sound of the bells fades into the distance. You pull your cloak tighter, the loaf of bread still warm under your arm. The smell of fire drifts from nearby cottages, promising rest. As you walk back through the quiet village, you realize how precious noise can be in winter. Laughter, music, bargaining, the rhythm of life continuing against the cold. The market will return when the snow melts, but for now, its echoes remain in the air, like the fading warmth of a hearth after the flames die down. You turn toward home, snow swirling softly around you. The road glows faintly under the pale moon. Somewhere far off, a dog barks once, then silence settles again, gentle and deep. The air outside bites harder now, the kind of cold that cuts straight through wool and skin. You can hear the bells of the village church tolling faintly in the distance, their sound muffled by falling snow. The path that leads to the chapel is narrow, lined with footprints that fill quickly with white. You follow them, feeling the crunch beneath your boots and the sting of frost against your cheeks. The church stands dark and heavy, its stone walls slick with ice. The door groans as you push it open. Inside, the air is cold but dry, filled with the faint scent of incense and damp wood. Candles flicker along the altar, their light trembling in the gloom. A few villagers kneel in silence, their cloaks steaming faintly as snow melts from their shoulders. According to surviving parish records, churches in the Middle Ages were often the only public buildings that stayed open through winter. The thick stone kept out the wind but also trapped the chill. The floor was cold enough to numb your feet within minutes, yet people came daily, believing that prayer itself could warm the soul if not the body. Faith was a kind of shelter, invisible but vital. One curious practice during these cold months was the blessing of the fields. Priests would lead small processions through the snow, sprinkling holy water on the frozen ground to drive away spirits of famine. Villagers followed, clutching torches and whispering prayers. Some carried bread or salt to scatter at the edges of their land. It was part devotion, part desperate hope that spring would return. Experts who study medieval religion note that these rituals blended belief and survival in ways that feel deeply human. People prayed not just for salvation but for warmth, food, and mercy from the weather. Churches became community centers as much as houses of worship. Inside these walls, life continued, Baptisms, marriages, funerals, all performed under the breath of winter. A priest in a faded robe moves slowly through the aisle, murmuring Latin words that echo softly off the stone. His breath clouds in the air as he swings a censer, and the scent of burning resin spreads through the church. You can almost taste it, sharp and sweet. The smoke curls toward the ceiling like a fragile thread connecting heaven and earth. A small but striking detail recorded in an old chronicle tells of villagers placing hot stones beneath their feet during Mass. They wrapped the stones in cloth and carried them inside, resting them on the floor to stave off frostbite during long sermons. The idea of warmth hidden underfoot feels quietly poetic, as if faith and ingenuity walked hand in hand. You sit on a wooden bench, its surface polished smooth by countless generations. Around you, the air hums with faint whispers of prayer. The light from the candles moves across the faces of the faithful, turning wrinkles into rivers of gold and shadow. Someone coughs softly, another sighs. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters, impatient to remind the world that it still rules. Researchers remain divided on how deeply religion structured daily survival in the coldest months. Some argue that faith provided psychological strength more than material relief. Others claim that the rhythm of ritual feasts, fasts, blessings gave people a way to measure time when days blurred together in endless grey. Whatever the truth, you can feel it now, the steady heartbeat of belief that keeps despair at bay. As the service ends, the priest steps forward with a small bowl of holy water. He dips his hand and traces a cross in the air, droplets scattering like tiny stars. The congregation bows, faces solemn, eyes bright. One by one, they leave the church, huddled in pairs, cloaks pulled tight. The sound of the door closing behind them is deep and final, like the closing of a hymn. You stay behind for a moment. The silence feels almost alive, full of echoes that refuse to fade. The candles tremble, their wax dripping slowly down to the altar cloth. You feel a strange peace here, even as the cold gnaws at your fingers. Perhaps that was the gift faith offered, not warmth, but stillness, the calm to endure what could not be changed. When you finally step outside, the sky has turned a dull silver. Snow continues to fall, blanketing the footprints of the congregation. The world seems reborn, soft and untouched. Behind you, the church bell tolls once more, its sound carrying far across the valley. You pull your hood up and begin the walk home, each breath a quiet prayer that tomorrow will bring light. The snow falls heavier tonight, soft and relentless. The village sleeps under a blanket of white, but inside many homes, quiet suffering stirs. You can hear it in the rasp of a cough, in the silence of an empty pot, in the slow steps of someone too weak to rise. Winter, beautiful from a distance, is cruel up close. In the Middle Ages, the cold months were known as the sickness season. When the air froze and the days shortened, illness spread quickly through crowded cottages and smoky halls. The damp, the soot, the lack of sunlight, it all gathered like an invisible fog. People spoke of winter fevers, lung weakness, and the wasting chill. Medicine, such as it was, offered little more than hope wrapped in herbs. Old medical manuscripts record a variety of strange and desperate remedies. A mixture of garlic and wine for the chest, a poultice of goose fat for the joints, powdered rosemary boiled in ale for the throat. Some of these may have helped a little, most did nothing at all. Still, people clung to them because doing something, anything, felt safer than doing nothing. A curious practice during these months involved sleeping with slices of onion near the bed to draw away bad air. Others hung sprigs of rosemary over doors to ward off disease. The scent of herbs, strong and comforting, filled homes like invisible armor. In towns, apothecaries did brisk business, selling dried flowers, oils, and powders to anyone who could pay. The poor relied on superstition and luck. According to accounts kept by monastic infirmaries, winter brought a sharp rise in both fevers and malnutrition. The cold, did not just make people sick, it made them weaker, slower to heal, more likely to lose hope. Bread grew moldy, water froze, and meat spoiled before it could be eaten. Many fell ill simply because their bodies could not fight anymore. Scholars who study medieval medicine often disagree about how much doctors truly understood of disease. Some insist that their herbal remedies showed remarkable observation for their time, while others argue that superstition ruled more than science. You can imagine those healers working by candlelight, surrounded by jars of dried plants and handwritten scrolls, trying to make sense of symptoms they could barely name. You walk through the village and see a dim light flickering in one cottage. Inside, an old woman sits beside a sick child, rocking gently, whispering a prayer. She dips a rag into warm broth and presses it to the child's lips. The room smells of thyme and damp straw. The boy's breath comes in shallow puffs, and every sound feels fragile. You realize how easily life slips away in such winters, how thin the line is between survival and loss. Not all illnesses were physical. Isolation gnawed at the mind. The endless cold made people restless, fearful, even strange. Some claim to hear voices in the wind or to see faces in the frost. Chroniclers wrote that winter madness was a known affliction, though no one agreed on its cause. Perhaps it was hunger, or loneliness, or simply too much silence. A small but telling record from a Benedictine abbey describes the monks opening their infirmary to villagers when sickness grew severe. They gave broth, blankets, and prayers. The act was both charity and duty, for tending the sick was seen as serving God directly. Yet the monks themselves were not immune. Their cloisters, quiet and close, became perfect breeding grounds for illness. Even faith could not keep contagion out. As you walk farther, you notice the graveyard near the edge of the village. The snow softens its outlines, mounds smooth and white beneath the falling flakes. A small wooden cross leans sideways, half buried. Death was never far in winter, yet people did not speak of it as tragedy but as rhythm. Life gave way to silence, then to soil, then to spring again. You can almost feel that acceptance hanging in the cold air. Researchers continue to debate whether medieval people feared disease as divine punishment or as natural misfortune. The records show both ideas living side by side. Some blamed sin, others blamed weather, or bad air, or simply the will of fate. Perhaps they needed all these explanations just to make sense of something that had no mercy. Back in your cottage, the fire burns low. You sit close, feeling the heat on your face and the ache in your bones. Outside, the snow keeps falling, steady and endless. You think of the villagers you passed, the coughing, the praying, the waiting. You understand now that winter in this age is not merely a season but a test, one that measures not strength alone but faith, patience, and love. You close your eyes. The sound of the wind fills the room, soft and rhythmic like breathing. The sickness season will pass, but its memory will linger in every cough, every scar, every whispered prayer. The fire pops once, and for a moment, the warmth feels like a promise kept. The cold night settles over the castle like a heavy shroud. Inside, the fires roar in their stone hearths, but the chill still seeps through the walls. You can almost hear it breathing in the corridors, slipping under doors, curling around corners. Tonight, you find yourself among those who rule this frozen realm, kings, queens, and courtiers wrapped in velvet fur and ceremony. The great hall glows with torchlight. Long tables groan under the weight of pewter dishes and flagons of wine. Laughter echoes from one end to the other, though every sound feels slightly hollow against the vastness of the stone. The scent of roast boar mingles with wax and smoke. At the head of the hall, the monarch sits surrounded by courtiers who smile too quickly and speak too softly. Power, like heat, gathers near the fire. Leaving the rest to shiver. According to accounts written by royal stewards and travellers, even kings were not immune to the cruelty of winter. The thick walls that defended against siege trapped the damp and chill inside. Chimneys smoked, windows rattled, and ice sometimes formed on the inside of glass. Monarchs slept under heaps of furs, sometimes so many that they could barely move. To wake before the fire was lit was to feel as helpless as a peasant. One fascinating custom at court was the warming ceremony. Before dawn, servants entered the royal bedchamber carrying pans filled with glowing embers. They slid them beneath the heavy linens to take the edge off the cold before their master rose. The process filled the room with the scent of ash and burnt fabric, but it spared the skin from the shock of icy sheets. Some chroniclers claimed that the rich drank wine spiced with pepper and cinnamon to heat the blood. Physicians of the day believed warmth could be cultivated from within, that a well-fed body resisted cold better than any cloak. Perhaps that is why winter banquets were so lavish. To eat was to live, to feast was to declare victory over the season. Yet not all shared in this comfort. Beyond the hall, servants slept in corridors or beside the kitchens, wrapped in old blankets. Their breath frosted in the dark while laughter continued above. The contrast was sharp, but it was accepted. Hierarchy was nature's order, as unchangeable as the snow. Researchers studying royal life in winter note how the cold shaped ritual and etiquette. The king's presence near the hearth was a symbol of life itself. Courtiers jockeyed for positions closest to the flames, and proximity to warmth became proximity to favour. Those assigned to distant benches joked bitterly that their loyalty froze first. A curious superstition persisted in many courts. It was said that if a candle's flame flickered during supper, someone in the room had betrayed their oath. Servants were blamed often, nobles rarely. Yet everyone watched the candles closely. Fire was not just comfort, it was conscience. Letters preserved from noble households describe the winter court as both splendid and stifling. Days passed in feasting, hunting, and endless prayer. Outside, the world slept under snow. Inside, ambition burned hotter than the hearth. The cold made tempers brittle. Arguments over rank or inheritance flared easily when weeks of confinement wore down patience. Some historians continue to question how much truth lies in tales of royal hardship. Were monarchs truly shivering, or were such stories exaggerated by commoners to find solace in shared discomfort? The evidence suggests a middle ground. Power could not banish the cold, but it could soften its bite. Gold-threaded blankets, silver cups of spiced wine, roaring fires tended all day. Yet even these luxuries could not keep fingers from numbing or frost from forming on a window pane. As the feast draws on, music fills the air. A harp plays softly, and voices rise in harmony. The sound is rich and haunting, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. You can almost feel the centuries between those notes. The monarch smiles, tired and distant, their face half lit by fire. Around them, courtiers whisper and watch. Each seeks warmth, whether from flame or favour. Later, when the hall empties, the fires are banked low, leaving the air heavy with smoke. You walk through the corridors, the silence pressing in. Somewhere a servant coughs. Far away, a hound barks once, then stops. You pass a tapestry stiff with frost and think of all the lives layered within these walls, bound together by duty and endurance. You find yourself in the royal chapel, smaller than the church in the village but grand in its stillness. Candles burn along the altar, their light steady and golden. A single figure kneels before the cross, cloaked in fur, crown resting on the stone beside them. You realize even rulers kneel in the cold. For a moment, everything feels suspended. The power, the hardship, the endless winter night. The air hums with quiet strength, with the knowledge that kings and peasants alike must bow before the same season. Outside, the wind rises again. You step to the window and look out over the snow-covered land. Fires sparkle in the distance, small and fragile against the dark. The royal court sleeps, but the world beyond endures, waiting for the thaw that will come in its own time. The wind moans outside the castle walls, yet within the village another sound rises, the soft shuffle of bare feet on snow. A small figure approaches the manor gate, wrapped in rags, head bowed against the cold. Behind him follow others, their faces hollow, hands outstretched. Tonight, they seek warmth more than charity. They are the poor at the gate, those who live at the edge of survival when the frost rules the land. In the Middle Ages, poverty was not rare or shameful. It was a condition as common as hunger. Chroniclers recorded how, during harsh winters, beggars moved from village to village, hoping for the kindness of strangers or the mercy of monasteries. Some carried wooden bowls, others scraps of parchment bearing marks from priests declaring them worthy poor. The unmarked had to beg by the roadside, relying on pity alone. According to parish accounts preserved from the 14th century, many towns kept alms doors in their churches, small openings where bread or broth could be passed through without letting in the cold. It was both compassion and control, a way to help without allowing the desperate too close. You can picture it now, a hand reaching through the dark, a piece of bread given silently, no words exchanged, only breath in the cold night air. One strange but touching custom among peasants involved leaving a crust of bread or a cup of warm ale on the windowsill at night. Some said it was for wandering souls. Others knew it was for the living. The travellers, too, ashamed to beg openly. Acts of kindness often hid behind superstition, for to help without pride was its own form of faith. Researchers of medieval charity point out that generosity and guilt often walked together. The rich gave because they feared divine punishment for hoarding, and the poor accepted because they had no choice. Monks preached that almsgiving could save the soul as surely as prayer. Every coin dropped into a beggar's hand echoed both virtue and anxiety. You walk through the narrow lanes, your breath misting the air. The snow is trampled here, streaked with mud. Near a stable wall, a woman huddles with two children, sharing a blanket patched beyond recognition. Their eyes follow you, not accusingly but with quiet exhaustion. The eldest child offers a wooden carving, small, clumsy, shaped like a bird. He whispers that it's for sale. You give him a crust of bread instead. His smile is small but real, and it feels like a candle lit against the dark. A curious detail from the time tells that some beggars warmed themselves by sleeping near the dung heaps of barns. The composting waste gave off faint heat, enough to keep frostbite away. It was a grim comfort, but warmth was warmth, wherever it could be found. Historians still discuss whether medieval charity truly alleviated suffering or merely softened its appearance. Some believe that the Church's strict hierarchy kept the poor dependent, ensuring both their humility and the rich man's righteousness. Others argue that compassion, however imperfect, built a fragile bridge across the frozen divide. You can sense both truths here, suspended in the hush between breath and prayer. You reach the manor gate where the beggars have gathered. A servant emerges carrying a basket. He sets it down without a word. Pieces of bread, a few apples, some scraps of meat. The poor move forward quietly, each taking only what they can carry. No one speaks. The snow muffles every sound except the faint rustle of fabric and the soft clink of wooden bowls. One woman pauses to thank the servant, crossing herself before retreating into the shadows. The light from a nearby torch flickers across her face, revealing eyes that still hold a spark of dignity. You realize that survival, in its simplest form, is an act of courage repeated endlessly in silence. Inside the manor, laughter echoes faintly from the hall. Music drifts through the stone like a memory of another world. The poor at the gate do not look toward it. They have their own rhythm, their own quiet grace. They eat what they've been given, share what they can, and disappear into the night, swallowed by the snow. Before you leave, you look down at the ground where they stood. A few crumbs remain, already freezing. The footprints fade with each gust of wind. The world resets itself, erasing signs of mercy and hunger alike. Only the cold remembers. As you walk back through the village, the air feels heavier. Smoke drifts from chimneys, thin and grey. Behind shuttered windows, families huddle close, grateful for what little warmth they have. You think of the woman, The child, the carving of the bird. You imagine it flying somewhere beyond this endless winter, carrying with it the small, stubborn hope that kindness leaves behind. The morning begins with the dull thud of an axe striking wood. You follow the sound through the crisp air until you reach the barn at the edge of the village. The door stands open, and a farmer lifts bundles of hay toward the rafters while his breath clouds in the cold. The smell hits you before you step inside. Hay, leather, earth, and the unmistakable musk of animals living close together. It is both sharp and strangely comforting. In winter, livestock were as precious as gold. Cows gave milk, sheep gave wool, hens gave eggs sometimes, but all of them needed warmth to survive. The barns of the Middle Ages were not separate buildings as we might imagine today. Often they were built into the homes themselves. The breath of the animals rose through the floorboards, mingling with the warmth of the hearth. People and beasts shared the same air, the same space, even the same danger of disease. According to surviving manorial accounts, a family might keep their animals indoors from November until April. The cows stood in rows tied by ropes, the pigs rooted in straw, the chickens clucked in corners. The noise never truly stopped. Yet that sound meant life. A quiet barn was a bad omen, the first warning that frost had claimed more than crops. One curious belief among herders was that speaking kindly to your animals each night helped them endure the cold. Some even whispered prayers into the ears of their cows, believing the beasts could carry those words to heaven in their breath. It was half ritual, half affection, but entirely human. Archaeological findings from farm sites show layers of manure and straw used to insulate floors. It sounds unpleasant, but that mixture generated warmth as it decomposed. The people who lived then understood what modern comfort forgets. Warmth comes from what is alive, from what still breathes and moves and works. You realize how closely life clung to life in this frozen world. The farmer calls out a greeting, his voice rough but friendly. His wife pours grain into wooden troughs, her fingers red and cracked from the cold. You help scatter hay while the animals shift restlessly, hooves clattering on the frozen ground. The cow nearest to you exhales a plume of mist that touches your face like a sigh. For a moment, it feels almost like spring again, soft and living. A small but intriguing note from monastic farming manuals mentions that monks taught peasants to line barns with bundles of rushes soaked in salt water. When dried, they kept pests away and reflected heat better than plain straw. Such practical wisdom moved quietly through villages, carried by word of mouth, often without the church realizing how deeply its lessons took root. Outside, a boy trudges toward the barn carrying buckets of icy water from the well. His boots are too big, and slush splashes over the sides. You take one bucket from him, and together you pour the water into a stone trough. The surface steams faintly as the animals drink. The boy smiles shyly. His cheeks roar from wind, and you see the fierce pride in his small act of help. Scholars continue to discuss whether medieval peasants treated their animals with affection or simply as tools of labor. The truth lies somewhere in between. These creatures were companions and capital, comfort and necessity. When one died, it was both a loss and a disaster. The family would mourn quietly, not with words but with silence that lasted for days. The afternoon light filters through gaps in the wood, turning the air to gold. You can see dust and hay swirling, glinting like tiny stars. The animals grow calm after feeding, their movements slower, more rhythmic. The warmth builds gradually, rising until the barn feels alive. The sound of chewing, breathing, shifting hooves fills the space. Outside, the wind howls. Inside, the world hums softly with endurance. As night approaches, the farmer lights a single lantern. Its glow turns everything amber. He pats one of the cows and murmurs something you cannot catch. His wife hums a lullaby for no one in particular, perhaps for herself. You understand now why so many medieval songs spoke of the barn as a cradle of life. When Christ was said to have been born among animals, the story felt familiar to these people. They lived in that image every day. When you leave, the sky is deep blue, and the first stars have appeared. You glance back and see the barn glowing faintly, warm light spilling through the cracks in its walls. It looks fragile, like a lantern in a storm. Inside, the animals shift and breathe, unaware of the cold pressing around them. The sound of the axe begins again somewhere behind you. It rings steady and sure, cutting through the silence. Each strike is a heartbeat, a reminder that survival is a rhythm, not a miracle. The night closes in, and the world breathes out a slow sigh of steam and smoke. By dawn, the snow has hardened into glass. The roads glitter under a faint sun, beautiful and treacherous. You stand at the edge of the village, watching a small caravan prepare to leave. Horses stamp and snort, their breath rising in pale clouds. The smell of sweat and cold iron fills the air. The travellers move slowly, wrapping thick wool around their faces and hands, checking every strap and buckle twice. It is a dangerous morning to be on the road. In the Middle Ages, travel during winter was a gamble with life itself. Paths disappeared beneath the snow, rivers froze solid, and bridges cracked under ice. Yet some journeys could not wait. Merchants delivering goods, messengers carrying royal orders, pilgrims moving toward distant shrines. To travel was to trust luck, skill, and prayer in equal measure. Old maps and pilgrim diaries describe winter roads as shifting ribbons of danger. Mud froze into jagged ridges, wagons broke their wheels, and the cold made iron brittle. Inns were few and far apart, and travellers often slept in barns, chapels, or beneath their own carts. Even the most experienced carried talismans against frostbite and thieves alike. A curious custom among medieval travellers was to heat stones in a fire and wrap them in cloth before placing them under their cloaks. These travelling hearts, as some called them, offered a few hours of warmth. The trick passed from wagoners to pilgrims, from mothers to sons, like a secret recipe for survival. Scholars who study medieval mobility note that movement never fully stopped, even in the harshest weather. Frozen rivers became temporary highways where sleds and wagons could cross with ease. Merchants prayed for deep cold rather than thaw, because solid ice made travel safer than half-melted roads. You imagine them guiding horses across the shimmering surface of the Rhine or the Thames, their wheels squealing softly on the frost. The caravan finally sets out, creaking down the road. The first few steps are slow, the horses struggling for balance. Their hooves strike sparks on the ice. You walk alongside for a while, listening to the rhythmic crunch of the snow. Every sound carries for miles in the still air. According to letters written by monks who journeyed between abbeys, travellers measured progress not by distance but by survival. Reaching the next village before nightfall was victory. Losing a wheel, a horse, or a hand to frost was expected. The cold did not punish. It simply reminded everyone of their limits. One traveller tells you that he has tied bells to his horse's harness, not for beauty but for safety. In heavy snow, sound is the only warning of approach. Without it, two carts might collide unseen in the white silence. The bells jingle softly, a small, constant prayer. By midday, the light grows sharper, reflecting off the snow until your eyes ache. The air is so cold it tastes metallic. You pass a group of pilgrims resting by a frozen stream, their cloaks stiff with frost. They hold out their hands to a tiny fire that barely seems to burn. One of them laughs quietly, saying that God must be testing their devotion. The others nod, smiling through chapped lips. Faith, hunger, and humor keep them moving. A small but intriguing story from a 14th century travel diary mentions that some pilgrims collected icicles from sacred wells, believing they held healing power. They carried the melting drops in wooden flasks to bless the sick back home. Perhaps it was belief, perhaps wishful thinking, but either way, the act gave meaning to their suffering. Experts continue to debate whether the medieval traveller was driven more by duty, trade, or faith. The truth seems tangled between them. Each journey was both pilgrimage and necessity, a movement through hardship that mirrored life itself. To travel in winter was to test one's soul against the frozen world and still find reason to keep walking. As dusk falls, the sky turns violet, and the wind begins to rise. The caravan stops near a copse of bare trees. Fires are lit, small and careful, surrounded by stones. The smell of smoke and roasted grain drifts through the camp. Horses snort softly, shaking frost from their manes. A few travellers share bread and ale, passing the flask from hand to hand. Conversation fades as exhaustion takes over. You lie back on a pile of straw, the stars above bright and brittle. The world feels vast and silent, a sheet of silver stretching to infinity. Somewhere in the dark a wolf howls. No one moves. It is part of the night, part of the story every traveller knows. The fire beside you crackles softly, its warmth flickering across the snow. You realize that in a world without engines or headlights, every journey depended on such fragile flames. You close your eyes, hearing the slow breath of the horses, the distant whisper of wind across frozen fields. Tomorrow the caravan will move again, leaving faint tracks on a road that the next storm will erase. Morning comes pale and thin, the kind of light that struggles to exist. You wake to a world of white silence. The fire in your hearth has sunk to a faint red pulse, and the air feels heavy with cold. You reach for a candle, strike flint against steel, and watch the tiny flame catch. The soft light spills across the room, golden and trembling, and suddenly everything seems alive again. Candles were the heart of light in the medieval winter. Before sunrise and long after dusk, their glow marked the rhythm of life. Beeswax candles belonged to churches and noble homes. Tallow candles, made from animal fat, belonged to everyone else. The scent of them was unmistakable, earthy, greasy, faintly sweet. Smoke clung to the air, staining the beams above. Light was a luxury measured in inches of wax. According to old guild records, candle making was a respected craft, almost sacred in its precision. The wax was melted, poured, and cooled in careful layers. In towns, chandlers worked year-round, preparing supplies for the endless nights of winter. A single good candle could burn for 6 hours, and families saved the best ones for holy days or emergencies. Most evenings were lit instead by firelight, flickering and uneven, painting the walls with shadow. A curious belief of the time held that if a candle flame danced too wildly, a spirit was near. People would pause their work and whisper a prayer, crossing themselves or touching iron for protection. Superstition flickered right beside faith, sharing the same light. You sit beside the fire and trim the candle's wick with a small knife. Its glow steadies, casting long shapes across the room. The shadows seem to move on their own, shifting like silent dancers along the walls. It is easy to see how the imagination thrived in such half-light. Every flicker could be a sign, every dark corner a story. One surviving letter from a Benedictine monk describes the winter evenings spent copying texts by candlelight. His fingers cramped from cold, the ink froze in its pot, and the smoke from the flame left black smudges on the pages. Yet he wrote that the quiet of those nights felt holy, that the darkness pressed him closer to the words. Light was not simply for seeing, it was for thinking, for praying, for remembering that the world continued beyond the cold. Researchers note that medieval people experienced darkness differently than we do. It was not absence but presence, thick, physical, alive. Night had texture, and the faint glow of a single candle became a universe of its own. The human eye adjusted to dimness as naturally as breath. In that half-dark, people found not fear but intimacy. the closeness of quiet hours spent together by the hearth. A peculiar tradition from some rural households involved candle watching. Families would sit in silence as the flame burned down, trying to predict the future from the way it flickered or split. If the wax pooled evenly, spring would be mild. If it dripped unevenly, storms were coming. When the wick sparked, someone said a new baby would soon be born. Hope was read in the language of light. The smell of tallow thickens the air, mingling with wood smoke and the faint sweetness of drying herbs hanging from the rafters. You glance around and see faces glowing in the warm light, eyes reflecting tiny points of fire. The children whisper stories of saints and monsters, each one ending with the same reassurance: the light always returns. Scholars still debate how much candlelight shaped medieval thought. Some suggest it gave rise to a slower, more meditative rhythm of living. The world moved at the pace of fire, flickering and fading, rekindled each morning. Others argue that darkness pressed people closer together, strengthening the bonds of family and faith. Whatever the case, the night stillness feels complete, as if the world is holding its breath. Outside, the snow drifts against the window ledge, faintly glowing in the candlelight. You can hear the wind scratching at the shutters. Inside, the flame burns steady, its reflection dancing in a cup of water nearby. You realize that this small, fragile glow has carried humanity through centuries of winter. When the candle finally gutters, a thin curl of smoke spirals into the air. The room falls quiet again, lit only by the faint red of the hearth. The darkness closes in, soft and heavy, not frightening but familiar. You close your eyes, and for a moment it feels as if the world itself exhales. The world outside has gone utterly still. Even the wind seems to have lost its voice. You step outside and feel the weight of silence pressing against your ears, a silence so deep it almost hums. Snow muffles every sound, softening the lines of the cottages, the trees, the church spire in the distance. The sky is low and grey, the kind that promises no warmth, only stillness. Winter at its peak brought something the medieval world both feared and cherished: quiet. With the fields frozen, the work slowed to almost nothing. No ploughing, no planting, no harvest to chase. For once the land rested, and so did the people. The days shortened until even time itself seemed to sleep. According to village calendars and manor rolls, January and February were the months of waiting work. Repairs to tools, spinning of wool, mending of clothing, and storytelling by the fire filled the hours that once belonged to the sun. Life became an inward rhythm, closer to the heart than the hand. Some chroniclers wrote that this pause was a mercy from heaven, a brief kindness in a hard world. A small but revealing detail appears in several monastic writings. The silence of winter was often compared to prayer. Monks described the hush of snow as the voice of God in its gentlest form, a wordless reminder that creation itself needed rest. To step outside after a snowfall was to walk inside that sacred stillness. You wander through the fields now, the snow crunching softly under your boots. The trees stand like statues, their branches heavy with frost. The air smells clean, almost metallic, and every breath feels sharper than thought. Somewhere far off, a crow calls once and then is swallowed by silence again. The emptiness is not lonely. It feels full, as if the earth is holding something deep beneath its frozen skin. One curious practice among villagers during this season was the listening walk. On certain days, people would go out together into the fields or woods without speaking, believing that the still air carried messages from the world itself. A shift in the wind, the crack of ice on the river, the faint hoot of an owl, all were seen as signs. Whether from nature or from God, no one dared to say, but everyone listened. Scholars of medieval rural life have long discussed whether this winter quiet created introspection or despair. Some argue that the long nights and isolation deepened faith and imagination, giving rise to poetry and songs that celebrated endurance. Others note the toll of solitude, the way minds could drift into melancholy when there was little to do but wait. perhaps it was both. Silence, after all, can heal or haunt depending on how it is heard. You reach the edge of a frozen pond, its surface smooth as glass. The reflection of the sky makes it seem endless. A group of children plays nearby, sliding on the ice, their laughter breaking the stillness like a bell. You smile, realizing how even the quiet has room for joy. Each sound echoes longer, as if the world refuses to let it go. Back in the village, you pass a cottage where an old man sits at the door carving wood. His knife moves slowly, the only sound a soft scrape against the grain. The smell of pine curls through the air. When he finishes, he holds up a small figure, a bird, wings spread, and nods to you without speaking. You nod back. Words feel unnecessary here. A curious folk belief recorded in a northern chronicle claimed that if you sat completely silent for an hour on the coldest night of the year, you could hear the earth sigh. Some said it was the sound of ice cracking deep underground. Others called it the breath of the sleeping season. Either way, the act of listening connected people to the land in a way prayer could not. As the sun sets, the sky turns a pale rose, then fades into indigo. Smoke rises straight from chimneys, unbroken by wind. You walk through the village as lanterns begin to glow behind shutters. The air feels thicker now, scented with stew and burning wood. Inside each house, voices murmur softly, telling old stories, humming half-forgotten songs. Researchers continue to explore how medieval people endured such stillness without modern distraction. Perhaps they understood something we have lost, that quiet does not mean emptiness, and solitude can hold a kind of peace. The world rested, and so did they. Not because they wished to, but because the season demanded it. You return to your own fire. The flame dances gently, reflected in the iron pot hanging above it. You sit, listening to the faint hiss of snow melting against the door. The silence stretches around you, wide and calm. Somewhere, far beyond this moment, spring waits, but not yet. For now, the quiet is enough. The silence gives way to a low moan of wind as you journey farther north. The air grows thinner, sharper, and the landscape changes its shape. Hills harden into mountains, rivers freeze into ribbons of glass, and daylight itself seems hesitant to rise. You have entered the lands where winter is not a visitor but a ruler, the far edges of medieval Europe, the north. In Scandinavia and across the Baltic, people lived in a world sculpted by frost. The nights stretched endlessly, and the sun hovered low even at noon, casting long shadows that never truly faded. Yet here, too, life endured. Smoke rose from turf-roofed houses buried deep in snow, and laughter drifted from halls where fires roared brighter than anywhere else. According to Icelandic sagas and Norse chronicles, winter was both feared and celebrated. The people called it the White Season, a time when the world tested courage and rewarded patience. Every village kept storerooms lined with salted fish, smoked meat, and barrels of ale brewed strong enough to last until spring. Families gathered in longhouses where the walls were made of timber and earth, thick enough to trap heat and stories alike. One curious practice among northern households was the ritual of keeping a single log burning throughout the longest night of the year. It was said to honor the spirits of the ancestors who had survived winters past. If the flame went out, it meant their protection had failed, and bad luck would follow. So each family took turns staying awake, feeding the fire, whispering names of the dead like prayers. Archaeological findings reveal that reindeer hides and woven wool were prized above all else. The outer garments were thick and layered, stitched with sinew and sealed with fish oil to keep out moisture. Even so, frost clung to beards and eyelashes, and skin cracked from the cold. Yet there was pride in enduring it, a quiet defiance that filled every story told beside the hearth. Researchers studying Norse society often debate whether these winters fostered hardship or heroism. Some argue that the constant struggle against the elements shaped their fierce independence and reverence for endurance. Others believe that the myths of frost giants and eternal darkness arose from the psychological toll of such long nights. The truth may lie somewhere between faith and fatigue. You step inside one of these longhouses now. The air is thick with smoke and the smell of roasted fish. A low fire burns in the center, its light licking the walls. Around it sit men and women wrapped in furs, their faces glowing red in the firelight. Someone recites a saga, the rhythm steady and deep, like a heartbeat echoing in the wood. The story speaks of ships trapped in ice, of heroes who braved storms to bring warmth home again. A curious superstition from these lands told that whistling during a blizzard could summon spirits of the storm, creatures of ice that danced unseen across the plains. To whistle was to invite them near, so people learned to listen instead, letting the wind sing its own song. You pause now and hear it yourself, a long, low voice moving through the rafters, rising and falling like a chant. According to travelers' journals from the 15th century, northern communities often shared everything during winter: food, furs, even labor. When a neighbor's fire went out, others would send embers wrapped in moss or bark, carried carefully through the snow. This custom, called sharing the flame, was more than kindness. It was survival woven into culture. Outside, the storm gathers. Snow whirls past the open door, hissing softly as it meets the heat. A young girl rushes to close the shutters, her laughter bright against the wind. Someone passes you a cup of warm ale, thick with honey. The taste burns your throat, sweet and fierce. For a moment, you feel the heartbeat of this place, the warmth carved out of the cold, the light coaxed from darkness. Historians continue to find fascination in how northern societies balanced reverence and rebellion against winter. They sang of frost as both enemy and teacher. The sagas rarely spoke of spring. They spoke instead of surviving until it came. Endurance itself was the victory. As the night deepens, the fire burns low but steady. The storyteller's voice slows, turning to a whisper. The longhouse feels timeless, sealed from the outside world by snow and belief. The smoke drifts upward, through the roof hole, carrying warmth into the frozen night. You close your eyes, hearing the wind claw at the walls, and you understand why these people built their faith in endurance. Outside, the storm finally eases. The stars return, pale and far away. The land glows faintly under their light, endless and silent. Somewhere beyond the frozen sea, another dawn waits, faint and slow. But for now, here in the north, the fire still burns. You travel south now, following the pull of the sun. The days grow a little longer, the snow a little thinner, though the air still bites. The Mediterranean hills lie before you, olive groves dusted with frost, stone villages sleeping beneath clear skies. It is winter here too, though it wears a gentler face. In Italy, Spain, and the southern reaches of France, the cold season rarely brought deep snow, but it carried its own hardships. Rain fell in long grey sheets, washing through valleys and flooding roads. Winds swept down from the mountains, dry and merciless, cutting through thin cloaks as sharply as northern frost. The poor huddled beside hearths of soft brick, while monasteries rang their bells through damp mist. According to letters preserved in the archives of Florence and Aragon, even mild winters could wound. Grain spoiled in damp cellars, olives froze on branches, vineyards lay in sleep, trade slowed as mountain passes filled with ice. People called this season the still time, when hope leaned on memory and patience. One peculiar practice recorded by travelers was the covering of citrus trees with cloth during the coldest nights. Families draped linen or wool over the branches like blankets, believing that warmth could be borrowed from the human touch that tied the knots. Children were told to whisper kind words to the trees before bed, so the fruit would return sweeter in spring. Whether charm or custom, it softened the season. You walk through a small Italian village where the stone streets glisten after rain. The air smells of wet clay and wood smoke. A woman pours steaming water over herbs in a clay bowl, sending fragrant steam into the cold air. She tells you it is for protection against coughs, though she smiles as she admits that faith plays as much a part as medicine. Historians often debate whether the Mediterranean winter was easier to endure or simply different in its discomforts. The poor suffered less from frostbite, yet dampness brought chills and fever. Crops might survive, but insects and rot thrived too. Even in these lands of light, the season had its teeth. Inside a small chapel carved into the hillside, you find candles flickering before painted saints. The walls smell faintly of salt and incense. A priest kneels beside the altar, his voice echoing softly as he prays for a good harvest to come. His robe is patched and faded, his breath visible in the chill. Warmth, it seems, was still a prayer even here. One curious superstition in southern Europe claimed that if a house cat slept with its back to the hearth, rain would last for 40 days. Farmers watched their animals carefully, half in jest, half in hope. In some villages, families kept doves indoors during the coldest weeks, believing their gentle cooing soothed restless spirits. Every sound, every gesture, carried meaning when the world slowed down. Researchers studying Mediterranean life describe winter as a time of conversation. Families gathered in courtyards under hanging lanterns, mending nets, patching clothes, or telling stories while wind shook the shutters. Music filled the pauses between chores, soft and rhythmic, meant to drown out the sighing of the weather. In those moments, the cold became background to the warmth of voices. You wander along a narrow street where the walls glow gold even in weak light. From an open window drifts the sound of a lute, slow and tender. The melody hangs in the air like breath. Somewhere, water drips from a roof into a puddle, the rhythm steady as a heartbeat. Everything moves at half speed, patient and unhurried. A curious note from a Venetian merchant's diary tells of winter markets held on frozen lagoons. When the canals turned solid, tents were pitched on the ice, selling roasted chestnuts and wine. The writer marveled at the sight of people laughing and skating beneath banners fluttering in the cold wind. Even where the sea ruled, winter found ways to enchant. Scholars remain divided on how southern winters shaped culture. Some argue that their mildness nurtured a sense of optimism, that people here believed more readily in renewal. Others claim that the unpredictability of rain and frost taught humility instead. Perhaps both are true. The warmth of the sun and the chill of the air taught balance, to take joy without forgetting hunger, to work even in stillness. As evening falls, the sky turns clear and pale blue. The wind softens, carrying the scent of rosemary and smoke. Villagers light torches along the square, and the faint hum of conversation drifts through the streets. You sit beside a fountain whose water runs thin and cold. The marble glows faintly in the moonlight. You watch the flickering of distant fires on the hills and realize that even here, in the so-called gentler lands, winter holds power. It may not bite as deeply, but it lingers in its quiet way, shaping habits, prayers, and patience. And when the stars appear above the olive trees, you understand that cold, whether fierce or mild, teaches the same lesson everywhere: endurance born of gratitude. The cold has settled deep into your bones now, but something different moves through the air tonight. A scent of smoke mixed with strange herbs, a whisper of ritual that feels older than prayer. You find yourself in a small cottage on the edge of the forest, where the walls are lined with bundles of dried plants and jars filled with dark liquids. Inside, a woman stirs a pot that steams and hisses. Her eyes catch the firelight, calm and knowing. In the Middle Ages, medicine and magic shared the same table. Physicians trained in universities quoted ancient texts by Galen or Avicenna, while village healers relied on memory, instinct, and the turning of the seasons. Winter was their busiest time. Fevers rose, joints ached, and melancholy crept in like fog. The cures, though humble, carried centuries of belief. Records from monastic infirmaries describe treatments that sound almost like poetry: compresses of chamomile for sorrow, rosemary for forgetfulness, sage for courage. The monks wrote their recipes with careful reverence, blending prayer and practice in equal measure. For every herb, a psalm; for every wound, a blessing. Even the act of grinding leaves in a mortar became a kind of meditation. One curious tradition among rural healers involved smoke charms. Dried herbs and pine resin were burned together, and the patient was passed through the smoke 3 times to drive out sickness. It filled the air with a sweet, biting scent that clung to skin and fabric. People swore that it kept away fever and spirits alike. Modern historians still debate how effective these remedies truly were. Some argue that herbal knowledge in the Middle Ages showed remarkable accuracy for its time. Others point out that much of it relied on symbolism more than science. Perhaps both are true. The human need to heal does not wait for proof, it listens to hope. The woman at the fire pours liquid into a small wooden bowl. It smells faintly of honey and vinegar. She tells you it is a tonic for the blood, though she winks, as if to say it might also ward off loneliness. Her hands move with quiet precision, shaped by years of habit. On the wall behind her hangs a small wooden cross beside a bundle of mistletoe. Faith and folklore live comfortably side by side here. A curious belief recorded in rural England held that if you spoke kindly to the herbs before harvesting them, they would lend their strength more freely. Healers would whisper to the plants at dawn, thanking them before cutting their stems. In winter, when little grew, they worked with what they had: roots, bark, dried flowers, and prayer. According to letters kept by noble households, many families employed their own herb wives or healers during the cold months. These women mixed practical cures with charms whispered in the local dialect. Some were respected, others feared. When illness lingered too long, suspicion turned quickly to witchcraft. The same hands that healed could be accused of harm if fate soured. Researchers examining these blurred lines between medicine and superstition often remark that medieval healing was less about certainty than balance. Every remedy was an act of negotiation between body and spirit, illness and faith, human and nature. To heal was to listen, not only to pain but to the rhythm of the world. You sit beside the fire while the woman wraps a cloth around a bundle of herbs and ties it with twine. She presses it into your hands and tells you to keep it near your heart. The smell is sharp: juniper, thyme, something smoky beneath. It warms you as if alive. Outside, snow begins to fall again, heavy and silent. The healer opens her door and watches it drift through the night. The earth sleeps, she says softly, but its breath still moves through the roots. Her words hang in the air, simple and true. One strange superstition from a French manuscript tells of people placing slices of apple on their window ledges during the coldest nights to ward off evil spirits. By morning the fruit would be frozen solid, glistening like glass. Whether or not the spirits stayed away, the beauty of those icy offerings was its own small comfort. You thank the woman and step outside, clutching the warm bundle. The world is white and vast, the forest whispering in the dark. You can smell the herbs on your clothes, mingling with the scent of pine and frost. Somewhere behind you, her fire burns steady, a pulse of warmth against the cold. The road ahead glows faintly under the starlight. You walk slowly, feeling the ache in your limbs ease with each breath. Perhaps it is the herbs, perhaps the thought that someone cared enough to share them. Healing, after all, begins as kindness. You look up and see the moon emerging from the clouds, bright and whole. The snow sparkles beneath it like ground glass. For the first time in weeks, you feel not the weight of winter, but its quiet mercy, the reminder that life endures, even in its smallest, simplest forms. The snow lies thick tonight, blanketing every path and rooftop, softening the world into stillness. Inside a cottage near the edge of the village, a fire burns low, and a circle of faces glows in its light. The air smells of smoke, wool, and baked bread. Someone clears their throat, and a hush falls over the room. Then, slowly, a story begins. In the dark heart of the medieval winter, stories were warmth. They filled the long nights when work was done and the wind clawed at the shutters. Tales spun around the hearth became as necessary as food, as binding as faith. They carried lessons, laughter, and warnings across generations, spoken by tongues that never learned to write but remembered every word. According to records kept by wandering clerics and poets, winter storytelling was a communal art. Families, travelers, and servants all gathered close to the same flame, their faces drawn together by the rhythm of voice. The storyteller's hands moved in the glow, shaping light and shadow, bringing old heroes back to life. Children leaned forward, wide-eyed, while the elders nodded along, already knowing every turn but loving it just the same. One curious detail found in the writings of early chroniclers describes how certain tales were only told during winter. Stories of ghosts, curses, and miracles belonged to the cold months, when the nights were longest and the boundaries between worlds felt thin. To tell them in summer was considered unlucky, as if the warmth itself might reject the chill of such words. Researchers who study oral traditions still argue about the purpose of these tales. Some say they were moral lessons disguised as entertainment. Others claim they were simply survival, a way to make meaning out of hardship. Perhaps both are right. A story could frighten, comfort, or make people forget for a while that the frost crept under the door. Tonight, you sit among them, listening. A man with a scar along his cheek tells of a knight who traveled through a blizzard to find a lost monastery made of ice. His voice rises and falls with the crackle of the fire, and every time he pauses, the silence feels alive. The children clutch each other's hands, shivering not from cold but from wonder. A small but touching practice among peasants involved giving the storyteller a token, after each tale a coin, a piece of bread, or even a candle stub. These gifts were not payment but gratitude, a way of keeping the words alive. A story, they believed, should be fed like any living thing. Outside, the snow continues to fall, muting the world. Inside, the next story begins, this one lighter. A girl with bright eyes tells a legend about a talking raven who tricked a miserly lord into feeding the poor. The laughter that follows is rich and contagious, rising like heat. Even the oldest faces soften in the glow. According to an account preserved in a Welsh monastery, many of the legends told in winter were later turned into songs by wandering minstrels who travelled from hall to hall. They carried the voices of entire villages in their melodies. One song about a snow maiden who melted for love was so well known that it crossed borders and survived for centuries in new forms. Scholars often discuss how storytelling blurred the lines between history and imagination. A tale could begin as truth and end as myth by the next snowfall. Yet accuracy mattered less than emotion. To tell a story well was to light a spark that burned long after the fire went out. You glance around the room. The faces are lit by the flames. A mother holding her child, an old man smiling to himself, a young boy staring at the embers as if seeing another world. The stories connect them in ways no feast or sermon ever could. In the flickering half-light, everyone belongs to the same dream. A curious superstition whispered in parts of northern France said that when a story ended, you must spit lightly into the fire to seal it so it would not escape and haunt your sleep. You watch as one man does just that, nodding solemnly before leaning back with a satisfied sigh. The fire hisses softly in response, as if accepting the offering. As the night wears on, the voices grow lower, slower. The final tale is a quiet one, about a farmer who found a single green leaf beneath the snow and took it as a sign that spring would come. When the storyteller finishes, no one speaks. The silence feels full, sacred. Outside, the wind has calmed. The snow glows faintly under the moonlight. Inside, the last embers pulse in rhythm with slow breathing. You realize that in a world with little light, stories were candles of their own, fragile but luminous, passed hand to hand, heart to heart, until morning. The next morning arrives grey and brittle. Frost clings to every branch, every roof, every iron hinge. You hear the sound of boots crunching on frozen ground and the dull clang of armor somewhere beyond the trees. Winter does not stop war, it only changes its sound. You follow the road that winds toward an encampment. The smell reaches you first: smoke, sweat, wet leather, and the faint scent of fear. Rows of tents stand stiff with frost, their canvas sparkling in the dim light. Horses snort clouds into the air. Men move slowly, breathless in the cold, tending fires that barely smoke. According to chronicles written by medieval soldiers, winter campaigns were some of the most brutal in history. Metal froze to bare skin, bowstrings snapped in icy air, and rations turned to stone inside their sacks. The cold made every action slower, every wound more dangerous. Yet kings and captains still sent their men to fight, convinced that honor and power could outlast the frost. One unsettling yet remarkable practice recorded in these accounts describes soldiers sleeping in shallow pits lined with straw and covered with cloaks of frozen wool. Their body heat formed small caves of warmth beneath the snow. In the morning, they broke free of the ice like ghosts clawing out of the earth. It was survival by instinct, learned through pain and necessity. Historians continue to argue whether the decision to fight in winter showed courage or cruelty. Some commanders believed that frozen ground made sieges easier and roads firmer for heavy carts. Others warned that armies starved faster when food and firewood disappeared. The truth, perhaps, is that ambition ignores the season. You walk through the camp, hearing the murmur of men sharpening blades. Their faces are grey with exhaustion. Some laugh too loudly, forcing cheer against the cold. A few kneel beside small fires, hands held out, eyes closed as if in prayer. The smell of burning pine fills the air. The flames flicker blue and white. A curious detail from a 15th century account tells of soldiers rubbing snow on their faces each morning to stay awake and alert. They called it ice prayer. It burned, but it kept them from falling into the numbness that claimed slower men. The same records mention that those who survived often remembered the quiet more than the battle, the eerie stillness before the clash, when breath froze mid-air and sound seemed to hide beneath the wind. You reach the edge of the camp where a blacksmith works beside a small forge. The hammer's rhythm is steady, ringing across the field. Sparks leap into the cold air, vanishing instantly. The man wipes his brow, though the air is freezing, and nods to you. His forge glows like a single heartbeat against the grey. He says little, only that metal and men both break easily in the cold. A group of archers gathers near a line of trees, testing their bows. The strings creak, and some snap with sharp cracks. They curse, then laugh, shaking their heads. Humor is their shield now. One begins to sing an old marching song, his voice rough but steady. The others join in, and the tune spreads through the camp like warmth. According to a letter written by a knight during the 100 Years' War, laughter was often the only thing that survived the cold. He wrote that the snow made men equal. The noble's fingers freeze as swiftly as the peasants', he said, and when the fire burns low, pride burns with it. As the day fades, the sound of distant horns cuts through the air. Movement ripples through the camp. Fires are stamped out, tents lowered, and horses bridled. The frost crunches underfoot as the men form ranks. The silence before they march feels heavier than battle itself. Scholars who study military life still puzzle over why so many medieval armies chose to fight in such conditions. Some believe that desperation, not strategy, drove them forward. Others think winter's stillness offered its own kind of advantage the enemy. Like the earth, slower to move. Yet when you look at these faces, you see no strategy at all, only the raw need to survive the next breath. As the soldiers march past, snow begins to fall again, soft and unhurried. The sound of boots blends with the sigh of wind. You watch until the figures fade into the white distance. The field grows quiet once more, broken only by the faint crackle of a forgotten fire still burning near the blacksmith's forge. You stand for a moment, feeling the cold seep into your boots. The snow erases the footprints almost instantly, as if the army never existed. In the stillness that follows, the air seems to remember their breath, their fear, their fleeting warmth. Winter accepts everything and forgets nothing. You turn back toward the village, the silence behind you deep and endless. Somewhere in that silence lies the truth every soldier learned too late. The only victor in a winter war is the season itself. The years pass in your imagination, and you begin to notice something strange in the chronicles and paintings that survive. The winters grow colder. Rivers that once ran swift now freeze so thick that markets are held on the ice. Entire forests stand silent beneath snow that lingers for months. The world itself seems to shiver. Historians call it the Little Ice Age, though those who lived through it had no name for what they endured. You find yourself standing beside a frozen river in England sometime in the 15th century. The surface stretches out before you like polished glass. Stalls have been set up upon the ice, selling pies, ribbons, books, and roasted nuts. Laughter echoes where boats once sailed. The air smells of wood smoke and wine spiced with cinnamon. Children skate on carved bones tied to their boots, their cries sharp and joyful. According to civic records from London and Bruges, frost fairs became a celebrated response to the bitter cold. When the Thames froze solid, merchants turned calamity into carnival. Music played, jugglers performed, and printers sold souvenirs pressed right there on the ice. The cold was no longer just an enemy, it was an event. Yet behind the cheer, hunger and hardship waited patiently at the edges of the city. A curious image from a 17th century woodcut shows oxen roasting over an open fire on the frozen river, the smoke curling into the icy air. People gathered close, stamping their feet to keep the blood moving. They called it feasting with frost. Beneath the laughter, you can almost sense defiance, the human urge to turn suffering into spectacle, to make art of endurance. Scholars studying climate history debate what caused this great chill. Some speak of volcanic eruptions darkening the skies, others of shifting ocean currents or changes in the sun itself. Whatever the reason, the result reshaped everything. Crops failed more often, storms struck harder, and whole villages vanished under snow. Yet through it all, life adapted. You walk through one of those villages now. The roofs sag under heavy frost, and smoke drifts weakly from the chimneys. A woman hangs fish to dry in the icy wind, while a boy chops frozen turnips with an axe. The sound is dull and final. Hunger walks beside them, unseen but familiar. From church records, we know that fasting became involuntary during these years. Bread grew coarse, made from rye mixed with ground acorns or bark. Families survived on broth, roots, and faith. Yet, even in scarcity, people found moments of grace. In letters from monks along the Rhine, one writes that the frost made every sunrise look like glass breaking, and that beauty itself became a kind of sustenance. A peculiar superstition emerged during this age of cold. Villagers believed that the frost was alive, a spirit that crept across fields at night, covering crops in its silver breath. Children were warned not to whistle after sunset, lest they call the frost father to their door. In the morning, they would rush outside and trace patterns in the ice, convinced they saw his footprints. Despite the hardship, ingenuity bloomed. Farmers began to store food underground, lining cellars with straw and ash to keep the frost at bay. Women wove thicker wool, experimenting with dyes that resisted moisture. Sailors learned to break harbor ice with poles, singing songs in rhythm to keep warm. Every adaptation was a small victory, carved from necessity. Researchers who examine diaries from this period often note a strange mixture of despair and awe. The people complained bitterly, yet they also wrote about the clarity of the air, the brilliance of the stars, and the beauty of frozen rivers glowing in moonlight. It seems that even in their suffering they found wonder. You walk farther along the riverbank as evening falls. The stalls are closing, their fires dying down. The ice groans underfoot, deep and low, reminding everyone of its strength. A musician plays a tune on a small pipe, the melody rising thin and clear into the night. For a moment, all feels timeless, the frozen water, the dim lights, the hum of life persisting despite it all. When you look toward the horizon, the sky glows faintly green, an aurora spilling across the stars. The crowd stops to watch, faces lifted, breath misting in the cold. No one speaks. The light ripples, silent and vast, as if the world itself is breathing. You feel something ancient move inside you, a recognition that hardship and beauty often arrive together. As the glow fades, people begin to drift away, their lanterns bobbing in the darkness. The ice cracks softly under the weight of their steps, but no one hurries. The night belongs to the cold, yet it holds them gently. You realize that this great age of frost, for all its pain, also gave birth to resilience so deep it shone like the stars above the river. The first hint of change comes quietly. The nights grow a little shorter, and the air loses its sharp edge. Beneath the crust of ice, water begins to move again, slow and secret. You feel it in the ground as much as hear it, the faint rhythm of life returning. The long winter is loosening its grip. In the medieval countryside, the thaw was both joy and danger. The frozen rivers broke open with sudden violence, flooding fields and washing away the bridges that had stood firm all season. Roads turned to mud, cellars filled with water, and livestock sank to their knees in the melting snow. Yet no one complained too loudly. The chaos meant that spring was near. According to chronicles kept by village priests, the first warm days were marked with small ceremonies. People lit candles at dawn to thank the returning sun. Children ran barefoot through puddles despite the chill, laughing as if the world had been reborn. Farmers went into their fields and knelt, pressing their hands into the damp soil to feel the pulse of the earth. A curious detail preserved in an old farming manual describes how peasants tested the coming season by watching crows. If the birds called loudly at sunrise, they said, the frost would not return. If the sky stayed silent, winter still lingered in the wings. Nature was a calendar more reliable than parchment. Scholars who study rural life often point out that spring in the Middle Ages was not instant renewal, but a slow recovery. The months of hunger were not yet over. Granaries stood nearly empty, and new crops had only just been planted. The first green shoots brought hope, but not sustenance. People survived on thin soups, roots, and dried beans, measuring patience by the handful. You walk through the village now, boots sinking into the soft earth. The smell of thaw is everywhere. Wet wood, animal musk, the faint sweetness of rot. Smoke rises from open doors as women air out the cottages, beating rugs and hanging clothes to dry. The sound of laughter drifts through the fields. The world, after so much silence, has found its voice again. One peculiar practice mentioned in a 13th century festival record describes how villagers greeted the thaw by carrying branches decorated with ribbons and shells through the streets. They sang songs to drive away the remnants of frost, sometimes dipping the branches into streams to wake the water. The celebration blended prayer with play, as if joy itself could hurry the season along. You pass a man repairing the wooden frame of his plough. His hands move quickly, confident despite their cracks and scars. He looks up and smiles, saying that the ground is softening early this year. You nod, feeling the optimism in his voice. In this world, every small change in weather can shift the fate of hundreds. According to a letter from a Cistercian monk, the thaw also marked a spiritual turning. Lent often overlapped with the season's change, reminding believers that penitence and renewal were mirrors of one another. The monk wrote that he could smell forgiveness in the melting snow, and though he meant it as metaphor, you understand what he felt. The air carries something clean, like breath after weeping. Researchers remain uncertain about how quickly the climate shifted from the bitter heart of winter to the breath of spring. Some years thaw came early and gently. Others were cruel, with frost returning to claim blossoms too soon. The unpredictability taught people humility. Nature did not follow their prayers, but sometimes seemed to listen anyway. You walk to the edge of a field where patches of grass push through the melting snow. The light has changed, it feels golden now, softer, almost forgiving. You can hear the drip of water from the eaves, the steady murmur of a stream breaking free. Birds flutter through the air, clumsy at first, as if surprised to find it moving again. A curious superstition survived in parts of France and Germany that said if you tasted the first drop of water from melting icicles, your words would stay truthful all year. Children ran to collect them, giggling as the cold stung their tongues. It was innocence disguised as ritual, an old memory of gratitude. By dusk, the village glows with a gentle haze of smoke and mist. The snow is gone from the roofs, and the ground gleams with moisture. The people move slower now, not from exhaustion but from awe. After months of surviving, they are learning to live again. You return to your cottage, stepping carefully over puddles that mirror the twilight sky. The air inside is still cool but no longer biting. You sit near the hearth and watch the small fire burn steady and clean. The sound of dripping water outside is constant, like a heartbeat. For the first time in what feels like ages, you open the shutters and let the air in. It smells of mud, moss, and promise. You close your eyes, breathing deeply, and realize that even the silence has changed. It no longer feels heavy. It feels like waiting for music that is about to begin. The thaw deepens. Grass pushes up in patches of green, and birds call in the morning. The days stretch longer, the sun warming faces that had forgotten its touch. You walk through the same village where months ago the air froze in your lungs, and now the smell of wet soil rises around you like incense. The world is the same but feels remade. In the Middle Ages, the end of winter was not sudden but gradual, a long negotiation between frost and light. The rivers still carried chunks of ice, the wind still nipped, but hope had returned. People spoke softly of planting, of lambs soon to be born, of the first market of spring. Life began to move again, one cautious breath at a time. According to the old chronicles of manorial life, this was the season of repair. Roofs patched, fences rebuilt, and ploughs mended. Fields once buried in snow now glistened with water. Men walked the furrows, testing the soil between their fingers, reading it like scripture. Women cleaned their cottages from top to bottom, sweeping away soot, stale air, and the scent of long nights. It was both work and ritual, a quiet declaration that the darkness had passed. One gentle custom described in a 14th century diary tells how villagers gathered at dawn to scatter ashes from their hearths over the fields. The ashes carried the memory of winter fires, the warmth that had kept them alive. By spreading it across the land, they offered the season's end back to the earth, trusting it to come life again. Scholars who study this transition say that spring held a deeper meaning in the medieval mind. It was not only renewal, but redemption. After months of scarcity and stillness, the thaw was proof that suffering did not last forever. Each blossom, each stream freed from ice, carried a hint of grace. You walk along the riverbank where children splash in shallow water, their laughter mixing with the sound of melting ice. The air smells of moss and smoke. A farmer nearby turns the first patch of soil, his face lit by a tired but certain smile. The plough creaks, the oxen snort, and the rhythm of the earth begins again. A curious superstition from Central Europe said that the first flower of spring held the power to banish illness for the whole year. People searched the fields for it, believing that to find and touch it before sunrise would ensure health and luck. Some pressed the petals into their prayer books, drying them as both charm and memory. In letters exchanged between monks during these months, many described the sudden flood of light in the cloisters. They wrote of how the sun streamed through coloured glass for the first time in weeks, painting the walls with living colour. One wrote simply, "The light feels heavier now, full of forgiveness." You imagine him standing there, eyes closed, warmed at last. Researchers today remark that medieval communities understood the rhythm of endurance better than most. They expected hardship, but they also expected its end. The wheel of the seasons turned not as hope, but as fact. Patience was not passive, it was an art, honed through every winter survived. As evening falls, the village gathers in the square. Someone plays a flute, another beats a drum. The people dance in a circle, their boots splashing in the mud, hands clasped tight. They do not dance for elegance, but for relief. Around them, the first stars blink awake, watching quietly as joy returns to the world. You sit on a low stone wall, the sound of laughter washing over you like warmth. For months you have followed them through darkness and frost, hunger and silence, and now this, the gentle triumph of survival. The wind softens, the fields breathe. The fire inside every cottage burns bright but no longer desperate.